The church bells of Lone Pine, California fell silent as the minute hand crept past noon, leaving only the whispers of the assembled guests to fill the stifling air of the small wooden chapel. Tessa Rawley stood at the altar in her mother's modified wedding dress, one hand clutching a bouquet of wildflowers, the other resting protectively over the slight swell of her belly. The June heat of 1874 was unforgiving, but the perspiration dampening her brow had little to do with the temperature. "He's just running late," she whispered to her father, who stood rigid beside her, his weathered face betraying his growing anger. "William will be here." But as the clock struck 12:30, reality began to set in. William Henderson, the mine foreman who had promised to make an honest woman of her, was not coming. From the back of the church, a tall figure in a dust-covered duster leaned against the doorframe. Garrett Young had ridden into town that morning, intending only to resupply before continuing north to the silver mines. He'd stopped at the church out of curiosity when he saw the crowd gathered on a Thursday afternoon. What he witnessed made his jaw tighten. "That man's a fool," he muttered to the older gentleman standing beside him. The older man, who Garrett would later learn was the town's doctor, nodded grimly. "Henderson took off last night. Word is he cleared out his accounts and caught the eastbound train." Garrett watched as the bride's composure finally crumbled. Her shoulders began to shake, and the bouquet fell from her trembling hands. Something fierce and protective stirred in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Tessa's father led her down the aisle, his arm around her shoulders as the guests parted like the Red Sea, their faces a mixture of pity and scandal. Tessa kept her gaze on the worn floorboards, unable to meet the eyes of the entire town who had gathered to witness her shame. As they neared the back of the church, Garrett stepped aside to let them pass. But when Tessa's tear-filled eyes briefly met his, something unspoken passed between them, a connection, immediate and inexplicable. "I'm sorry, miss," he said, tipping his hat. She didn't respond, just clutched her father's arm tighter as they exited into the harsh California sunlight. Garrett watched them go, then turned back to the doctor. "The lady's in a family way." "Yes," the doctor replied quietly. "Henderson got her with child and promised marriage. Now she'll bear the disgrace alone." Garrett's hand tightened around the brim of his hat. "Where's her home?" "Rawley Ranch, about 3 miles west of town. But what business is that of yours, stranger?" Garrett settled his hat back on his head. "Just seems to me that someone ought to make things right." Tessa sat motionless on the edge of her bed, still in her wedding dress. The house was quiet now. Her father had stormed off to the barn, and her mother had finally stopped crying in the kitchen. The weight of her situation pressed down upon her shoulders. Unmarried, pregnant, and now the subject of every gossip in Lone Pine. A knock at the front door pulled her from her thoughts. She heard her mother's footsteps, then murmured voices. A moment later, a gentle tap came at her bedroom door. "Tessa," her mother called, there's a gentleman here to see you." "I don't want to see anyone, Mother. He says it's important. A Mr. Young." Curiosity overcame her embarrassment. She didn't know any Young in these parts. Quickly wiping her tears and straightening her dress, she made her way to the parlor. The man from the back of the church stood in the center of the room, hat in hand. Up close, she could see he was older than she initially thought, perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin and lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. His eyes were a startling blue against his tanned face. "Miss Rawley," he said with a slight bow of his head. "I'm Garrett Young." "What do you want, Mr. Young?" Tessa asked, her voice raw from crying. "I witnessed what happened at the church today. I wanted to see if there was anything I could do to help." Tessa gave a bitter laugh. Unless you can erase the memory of today from everyone's mind or make William magically reappear, I don't see how you can help." "I can't do either of those things," Garrett admitted, "but I can offer you a solution if you're willing to hear it." Her father entered from the kitchen, eyeing the stranger suspiciously. "What kind of solution?" Garrett stood straight, meeting the older man's gaze directly. "Sir, I know this is unorthodox, but I'd like to offer to marry your daughter." A stunned silence fell over the room. "You don't even know me," Tessa finally managed. "That's true," Garrett acknowledged. "But I know what it's like to be alone when the world seems set against you. No child should come into this world bearing the weight of scandal, and no mother should have to face that burden alone." "And what do you get out of this arrangement, Mr. Young?" her father demanded. "I've been wandering for years, sir. I've got savings, a small stake in a Colorado silver mine that pays dividends, and skills as a horse trainer. What I don't have is a home or family." His eyes shifted to Tessa. "I'm not offering romance, Miss Rawley. I'm offering partnership, respect, and a name for your child." "This is absurd," Tessa's mother interjected. "Tessa, you can't possibly consider marrying a complete stranger." But Tessa was studying Garrett's face, searching for any sign of deceit or hidden motive. All she found was a steady, honest gaze that didn't waver. "Would we stay here in Lone Pine?" she asked. "If that's what you want, or we could start fresh elsewhere." Her father scoffed. "And what if William returns?" Garrett's expression hardened. "A man who runs once will run again. Your daughter and her child deserve better." Tessa's hand moved to her stomach. She thought of the whispers that would follow her child throughout life in this town. The pointed fingers and cruel words. Then she thought of starting anew somewhere else, with a man who, though a stranger, had shown more honor in the past hour than William had in all their time together. "I need to think," she said quietly. Garrett nodded. "Of course. I'm staying at the Wayfarers Inn. I'll be there until tomorrow noon if you want to talk further." He placed his hat on his head. "Good day to you all." After he left, Tessa's parents erupted into arguments both for and against the strange proposal, but Tessa heard none of it. She was thinking of the baby growing inside her, and what kind of life she wanted to provide. As the sun began to set, painting the western sky in brilliant oranges and reds, Tessa made her decision. Garrett was packing his saddlebags when a knock came at his hotel room door. He opened it to find Tessa Rawley standing in the hallway, wearing a simple blue dress, her honey blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun. "Miss Rawley," he said, surprised. "Please come in." She hesitated, then stepped inside, keeping the door open for propriety's sake. "I've thought about your offer," she said without preamble. "Before I give you my answer, I need to know more about you. Who is Garrett Young? Where do you come from? And why would you marry a woman carrying another man's child?" Garrett leaned against the dresser, considering her questions. "I was born in Missouri. My father was a horse trader, taught me everything about breeding and training. I fought for the Union in the war, then headed west afterward. As for why," he paused. "My sister found herself in a similar situation years back. The man who promised to marry her disappeared when he found out about the baby. She died in childbirth, alone except for me, and her son, my nephew, grew up with the taint of illegitimacy. I couldn't save her, but maybe I can help you avoid the same fate." Tessa studied him, weighing his words. "And you truly don't expect, that is, a husband's rights?" A slight flush colored Garrett's cheeks. "This would be a marriage of convenience, Miss Rawley. I wouldn't presume anything beyond what you're willing to give." She took a deep breath. "Then I accept your proposal, Mr. Young. But I have conditions." "Name them." "I want to leave Lone Pine, start somewhere new where nobody knows our story." Her voice grew stronger. "And I want honesty between us always. No secrets." "Agreed on both counts," Garrett said. I know a place in Northern California near the Oregon border. Good land, small community that minds its business. I passed through last year and liked what I saw. How soon can we leave? How soon can you be ready? The ghost of a smile touched her lips. Give me 2 days. Garrett nodded. We should be married before we go. Will tomorrow afternoon work? Yes, Tessa said, then added softly, Thank you, Mr. Young. Garrett, he corrected. If we're to be married, you might as well use my given name. Garrett, she repeated, testing the feel of it on her tongue. And I'm Tessa. Tessa, he echoed with a small smile. I'll see you tomorrow at the Justice of the Peace at 3 o'clock. The ceremony was nothing like the elaborate church wedding that had been planned. Just Tessa, Garrett, her parents, and the Justice of the Peace in his small office. Tessa wore a simple dress, not the wedding gown that now lay packed away. She spoke her vows clearly, her hand steady as Garrett slipped a plain gold band hastily purchased that morning onto her finger. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the justice declared. You may kiss the bride. There was an awkward moment as they both realized they hadn't discussed this part. Finally, Garrett leaned forward and placed a brief, gentle kiss on her lips. It was perfunctory, yet something inside Tessa stirred at the contact. Her mother cried, though whether from happiness or sorrow was hard to tell. Her father shook Garrett's hand with a warning grip. You take care of my girl and grandchild, Young. With my life, sir, Garrett promised. They left the next morning before dawn. Tessa's belongings were packed into a wagon Garrett had purchased, along with supplies for the journey. Her parents stood on the porch of the ranch house, her mother dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Tessa embraced them both, promising to write once they were settled. As they pulled away, Tessa didn't look back at Lone Pine. There was nothing there for her now but painful memories. It's about 10 days to where we're headed, Garrett explained as they traveled north. A place called Willow Creek. We'll take it slow, make sure you're comfortable. I'm not fragile, Tessa insisted. I've been helping on my father's ranch since I was a girl. Garrett smiled. I don't doubt your strength, Tessa, but you're carrying precious cargo and rough trails aren't kind to expectant mothers. She placed a hand on her stomach, still amazed at how her life had changed so drastically in just a few days. How did you come to know Willow Creek? I delivered a string of horses there last year. It's growing but not crowded, situated in a valley with good water and timber. The winters are mild by northern standards. He glanced at her. There's a doctor there too, seemed competent. Tessa nodded, appreciating his thoughtfulness. What will we do there? I thought we might start a horse ranch, Garrett said. I've saved enough to buy land, and I noticed they're short on quality stock in that region. With your ranch experience and my training skills, we could build something worthwhile. A real partnership, Tessa mused. That's what I offered, isn't it? Garrett replied with a small smile. As they made camp that first night, Tessa realized how little she knew about the daily habits of the man who was now her husband. He moved with efficiency, setting up their camp and preparing a simple but hearty meal over the fire. He insisted Tessa take the small tent while he slept under the stars. Aren't you worried what people might think if they come across us? Tessa asked as she prepared for bed, a married couple sleeping separately. The only people we're likely to encounter on this trail are travelers like ourselves who won't give it a second thought, Garrett assured her. Besides, your comfort and privacy come first. Tessa nodded, oddly touched by his consideration. Good night, then. Good night, Mrs. Young. The title gave her pause. She was Mrs. Young now, not Mrs. Henderson as she had planned, but Mrs. Young. And somehow, it didn't feel as strange as she would have expected. The journey north was surprisingly pleasant. They fell into an easy rhythm, traveling by day and making camp before sunset. Garrett was a quiet companion, but not uncomfortably so. He pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his travels, and Tessa found herself enjoying his dry humor and thoughtful observations. On the third night, as they sat by the campfire after dinner, Tessa decided it was time to know more about the man she had married. "You mentioned fighting in the war," she began. "Were you at any major battles?" Garrett's expression grew distant. "Too many. Shiloh, Vicksburg, Atlanta." He poked at the fire with a stick. "I don't much like talking about those days." "I understand," Tessa said softly. "My older brother fought for the Union as well. He didn't come home." Garrett looked up, meeting her eyes across the flames. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." She hesitated, then asked, "Have you ever been married before?" "No," he answered. "Came close once before the war. Her name was Sarah, but she married someone else while I was away fighting." "That must have hurt," he shrugged. "It was for the best. I wasn't the same man who left." After a moment, he turned the conversation. "What about you? How did you meet Henderson?" Tessa sighed. "William came to Lone Pine about a year ago to manage the Sierra Mining Company operations. He was charming, educated from back east. He made me feel special, showed me attention no one else ever had." She looked down at her hands. "I was foolish." "Not foolish," Garrett corrected. "Just trusting. There's a difference. Either way, I ended up." She gestured to her stomach. "When is the baby due?" "November, according to the doctor." Garrett nodded thoughtfully. "We should be well settled by then." They lapsed into comfortable silence, watching the flames dance in the darkness. "Garrett," Tessa said after a while, "thank you for doing this." He looked up, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "You don't need to thank me, Tessa. We're helping each other." As they continued their journey, Tessa began to notice small things about Garrett: how he always made sure she ate first, how he would scout ahead to find the smoothest path for the wagon, how he sang quietly to the horses as he brushed them down each evening. He was a man of routine and quiet competence, and she found herself drawing comfort from his steady presence. On the sixth day, they encountered a traveling family headed south. The father eyed them suspiciously until Garrett introduced Tessa as his wife. The mother, noticing Tessa's condition, shared some ginger root for morning sickness and advice about birthing that made Tessa blush. Their children played around the combined camp as the adults shared a meal. "You make a fine-looking couple," the woman, Mrs. Peterson, remarked as she helped Tessa wash the dishes in a nearby stream. "How long have you been married?" "Not long," Tessa admitted. Mrs. Peterson smiled knowingly. "Well, he watches you like a hawk. Very protective, that one." Tessa glanced over to where Garrett was talking with Mr. Peterson, suddenly seeing him through a stranger's eyes, tall and strong, his movements confident but not boastful, his expression attentive as he listened to the other man. "Yes," she agreed softly. "He is." That night, a summer storm rolled in unexpectedly. Tessa was awakened by thunder and the sound of rain pelting the canvas tent. She heard Garrett moving around outside, securing their belongings. When he finally ducked into the tent, he was soaked to the skin. "I'm sorry," he apologized, water dripping from his hair. "The storm came on too fast to find better shelter." "You're drenched," Tessa said, concerned. "You'll catch your death." "I'll be fine once I get these wet things off." He hesitated. "I should go back out." "Don't be ridiculous," Tessa interrupted. "There's room enough in here for both of us." He looked uncertain. "Tessa." "I trust you, Garrett," she said simply. After a moment, he nodded. He turned his back to her and quickly removed his wet shirt and pants, leaving only his undergarments. Tessa averted her eyes, though not before noticing the broad expanse of his shoulders and a web of scars that crossed his back. War wounds, she assumed. He settled onto his bedroll as far from her as the small tent would allow. "Good night, then," he said stiffly. "Good night." she replied, curling onto her side. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Tessa. She was acutely aware of Garrett's presence, of his measured breathing and the warmth radiating from his body in the cool, damp air. It was the first time they had slept in such close proximity, and she found it both unsettling and oddly comforting. "Garrett," she whispered after a while, "are you awake?" "Yes," came his reply. "Tell me about Willow Creek. What's it really like?" She heard him shift to face her direction. It's nestled in a valley between pine-covered mountains. The creek it's named for runs clear and cold year-round. There's good farmland in the valley bottom, and the hillsides are perfect for grazing. The town itself is small but growing: a general store, blacksmith, a decent hotel, a school. "It sounds beautiful." "It is," he assured her. "You'll see for yourself soon enough." "And you think we can make a life there, together?" There was a pause. "I do," he said finally. "It won't be easy at first, but we both know hard work, and I think—" He trailed off. "What?" she prompted. "I think we could be good together, Tessa, as partners." Something warm unfurled in her chest at his words. "I think so too." They arrived in Willow Creek on a clear morning in early July. The town was just as Garrett had described: a small settlement nestled in a picturesque valley, with mountains rising on either side. As they drove down the main street, Tessa took in the wooden buildings, the busy general store, the small whitewashed church. People nodded greetings, curious about the newcomers. Garrett guided the wagon to a modest hotel at the end of the street. "We'll stay here while I finalize the land purchase and we get our bearings," he explained. The hotel proprietress, Mrs. Simmons, was a plump, friendly woman who clucked with approval when Garrett introduced Tessa as his wife. "It's about time you settled down, Mr. Young, and with such a lovely bride. How far along are you, dear?" she asked Tessa directly, eyeing her midsection. Tessa blushed. "About 4 months." "Wonderful. We need more little ones in Willow Creek. Now let me show you to your room." The room was clean and comfortable, with a large bed, a washstand, and a small sitting area. Tessa stood awkwardly in the center after Mrs. Simmons left them alone. Garrett cleared his throat. "I can sleep in the chair," he offered, gesturing to the armchair by the window. "You'll do no such thing," Tessa replied firmly. "The bed is plenty big enough for both of us. We're married, after all." He looked at her carefully. "Are you sure?" "I am." She began unpacking her things, hoping her face didn't betray her nervousness. They had slept in the same tent during the storm without incident, but this seemed different, somehow more intentional, more intimate. They settled into a routine in Willow Creek. During the days, Garrett would meet with the land agent and make arrangements to purchase the property. He had his eye on 100 acres with a small cabin, about 2 miles from town. Tessa acquainted herself with the town, meeting the shopkeepers and some of the local women. Most evenings, they would have dinner together at the hotel, talking about their respective days and making plans for their future. Tessa was surprised by how easily conversation flowed between them now, how comfortable she felt in his presence. At night, they shared the bed, each staying carefully on their own side. Tessa would lie awake, listening to Garrett's steady breathing, wondering about the strange path her life had taken and the unexpected feelings beginning to stir inside her for this man who was her husband in name only. 1 week after their arrival, Garrett came to the hotel around midday, his face alight with excitement. "It's done," he announced. "The land is ours." Tessa jumped up from where she had been mending a tear in one of his shirts. "Really? When can we see it?" "Right now, if you're up to the ride." They rode double on Garrett's horse, Tessa sitting in front of him, his arms around her to hold the reins. She was intensely conscious of his chest pressed against her back, the strength in his thighs as they rode. The property exceeded her expectations. Rolling pastureland stretched toward pine-covered hills, with a clear stream cutting through it. The cabin was small but sound, with 2 rooms and a stone fireplace. A barn and corral stood nearby, ready for the horses Garrett planned to acquire. "What do you think?" he asked as they stood on what would be their front porch. Tessa turned to him, her eyes shining. "It's perfect, Garrett, absolutely perfect." His face softened in a way she hadn't seen before. "I'm glad you like it. It needs work, but we'll make it a home," she finished for him. On impulse, she reached up and kissed his cheek. "Thank you." He looked startled, then pleased. "You're welcome." They moved into the cabin the following day. The interior was bare but clean, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area and a smaller bedroom. Garrett had purchased a bed, table, chairs, and other essentials in town, which were delivered that afternoon. As Tessa arranged their few belongings and hung curtains she had bought from the general store, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced since before William's betrayal. This was her home now, hers and Garrett's, and she was determined to make it a place of peace and comfort. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues, Tessa felt Garrett's eyes on her. "What is it?" she asked, turning to meet his gaze. "You're different here," he observed. "Happier, I think." She considered this. "I am happy," she realized. "I didn't expect to be, but I am." "Because we're away from Lone Pine, partly," she admitted, "but also because of you, Garrett. You've given me a chance to start over, to build something meaningful." Her hand moved to her growing belly. "For both of us." His expression was unreadable in the fading light. "I want you to be happy here, Tessa. I want both of you to be happy." She reached over and placed her hand over his where it rested on the porch railing. "We will be." As summer gave way to autumn, Garrett and Tessa fell into the rhythm of ranch life. Garrett acquired their first horses, 4 mares and a stallion with excellent bloodlines, and began training them. Tessa planted a kitchen garden, learned to make soap from a neighboring farmer's wife, and prepared for the baby's arrival. They worked side by side during the days, Garrett teaching Tessa about horse breeding and training while she shared her knowledge of cattle and crop management from her father's ranch. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes reading, sometimes talking, sometimes just enjoying comfortable silence. And each night they shared the bed, the invisible line down the middle becoming less defined as the weeks passed. Tessa would sometimes wake to find Garrett's arm draped protectively over her growing middle, or her back pressed against his chest. Neither mentioned these unconscious intimacies in the light of day. As Tessa's pregnancy progressed, Garrett became increasingly protective. He insisted on doing the heavier chores, brought the town doctor out to check on her regularly, and scoured the general store for books on childbirth and infant care. "You don't need to worry so much," Tessa told him one evening as they sat by the fire. She was in her 7th month now, her belly a prominent curve beneath her dress. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "I know," Garrett said, not meeting her eyes, "but my sister—" Understanding dawned. "Your sister died in childbirth." He nodded, his face grim. "There were complications. The doctor came too late." Tessa moved to sit beside him on the small sofa, taking his hand in hers. "I'm healthy, Garrett. The baby is strong. Dr. Miller says everything is progressing normally." "I can't lose you," he said quietly, then seemed surprised by his own words. Tessa's heart quickened. "You won't," she promised, squeezing his hand. He looked at her then, his blue eyes intense with emotion. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her. Not the perfunctory kiss of their wedding day, but a real kiss, gentle yet filled with meaning. When they parted, Tessa's breath came faster. "Garrett, I'm sorry," he began, but she shook her head. "Don't be." She touched his face, feeling the rough stubble beneath her fingers. I've wanted you to do that for weeks." His eyes widened. "You have?" "Yes," she smiled shyly. "I think I'm falling in love with my husband." Joy spread across his features. "And I with my wife." He kissed her again, deeper this time, his arms wrapping around her as best they could with her pregnant belly between them. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "Tessa," Garrett said, his voice husky, "I want us to be real, not just for the baby's sake, but for ours." "It is real," she assured him. "More real than anything I've ever known." That night, as they lay in bed, the invisible line was gone. Garrett held Tessa close, his hand resting protectively over where their child, for he had already begun to think of the baby as his own grew within her. They talked long into the night, sharing hopes and dreams, fears and secrets, building the foundation of a love that had begun in the most unlikely circumstances. October brought cooler weather and the first touches of autumn color to the trees surrounding their property. Garrett worked tirelessly to ensure the cabin and barn were ready for winter. He added a lean-to kitchen at Tessa's request and built a cradle from pine wood, carefully sanding it smooth and staining it a rich honey color. Their relationship had blossomed in the weeks since their first real kiss. They were truly husband and wife now in every sense, their growing love for each other strengthening the bond that had begun as a practical arrangement. Garrett would often find reasons to touch Tessa throughout the day, a hand on her shoulder, fingers brushing as they passed tools, a kiss stolen while working side by side. And each night they fell asleep in each other's arms. "What shall we name the baby?" Garrett asked one evening as they sat before the fire, his hand gently caressing Tessa's 8-month belly. She looked up from her knitting a tiny cap for the baby. "I haven't given it much thought," she admitted. "With everything that happened, it didn't seem real until we came here." "Well, we should decide," he said practically. "The little one will be here before we know it. If it's a boy," Tessa suggested, "perhaps Thomas after my father." Garrett nodded. "Thomas Young, it has a good sound. And for a girl," Tessa thought for a moment, "what was your mother's name?" "Elizabeth," Garrett replied, a smile touching his lips, "though everyone called her Betsy." "Elizabeth Young," Tessa tried the name. "I like it. So do I." Garrett's hand stilled as he felt a strong kick beneath his palm. "Whoa, someone has an opinion," Tessa laughed. "He or she has been quite active lately. The doctor says that's a good sign." Garrett's expression grew serious. "Tessa, when the time comes, I want you to have the best care possible. I've already spoken to Dr. Miller about staying here at the ranch when your time is near." She touched his face tenderly. "You really do worry too much." "I can't help it," he admitted. "I love you too much not to worry." The words, spoken so simply, filled Tessa with warmth. "I love you too, Garrett." November arrived with an unexpected early snow that blanketed their land in pristine white. Tessa stood at the window, watching Garrett clear a path to the barn, her hands resting on her enormous belly. She was due any day now, and a mixture of excitement and anxiety filled her. A sharp pain made her gasp and clutch the windowsill. When it passed, she took a deep breath. It wasn't the first pain she'd felt that day, but it was stronger than the others. Another followed 15 minutes later, and she knew. When Garrett came in, stomping snow from his boots, Tessa was sitting calmly at the table. "I think it's time," she told him. "The baby's coming." The color drained from his face. "Are you sure?" "It's snowing, the doctor. We have time," she assured him, though another contraction gripped her even as she spoke. "But you should fetch Dr. Miller now, before the snow gets worse." Garrett moved with controlled urgency, helping Tessa to bed before preparing to ride to town. "I'll be as quick as I can," he promised, kissing her forehead. "Will you be all right until I return?" She managed a smile through her discomfort. "I'll be fine." This part takes hours. Remember what the doctor said. Just hurry back with help." The next hours were a blur of pain and waiting for Tessa. Her contractions grew stronger and closer together as the afternoon waned into evening. She tried to stay calm, remembering the advice of the doctor and the neighboring women who had shared their birthing experiences with her. Just as she began to fear that Garrett wouldn't return in time, she heard the sound of horses approaching. Moments later, Garrett burst through the door, followed by Dr. Miller and, to her surprise, Mrs. Simmons from the hotel. "I brought reinforcements," Garrett explained, his face tight with worry. "Mrs. Simmons has delivered more babies than the doctor." "It's true," the older woman confirmed cheerfully, removing her coat and rolling up her sleeves. "Now let's see how you're progressing, dear." What followed were the most difficult and miraculous hours of Tessa's life. The pain was beyond anything she had imagined, but through it all, Garrett stayed by her side, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement. When Dr. Miller tried to suggest he wait outside, as was customary, Garrett's response was a firm refusal. "I'm not leaving my wife," he stated, his eyes never leaving Tessa's face. As midnight approached, Mrs. Simmons announced that it was time to push. Tessa gathered her remaining strength, gripping Garrett's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. "You can do this," he told her. "You're the strongest woman I know, Tessa Young." With a final, tremendous effort, Tessa brought their child into the world. A robust cry filled the cabin as Dr. Miller announced, "It's a boy, a fine, healthy boy." Tears streamed down Tessa's face as the squalling infant was cleaned, wrapped, and placed in her arms. He had a shock of dark hair, and when he briefly opened them, eyes that promised to be as blue as his father's, his true father, Garrett, who now looked upon him with undisguised love. "Hello, Thomas," Tessa whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand. She looked up at Garrett. "Would you like to hold your son?" The emotion that crossed Garrett's face was profound. Carefully, as if handling the most precious treasure in the world, he took the baby from her arms. "Hello, Thomas Young," he said, his voice thick. "Welcome to the world." Later, after Dr. Miller and Mrs. Simmons had gone to sleep in the main room, promising to return to town once the snow cleared, Garrett sat on the edge of the bed beside Tessa, their son sleeping peacefully in a cradle nearby. "Are you all right?" he asked, brushing a strand of hair from her tired face. "I'm wonderful," she assured him, though exhaustion pulled at her. "We have a son, Garrett. We do." His eyes shone with pride and something deeper. "Tessa, I need you to know something. From this moment on, Thomas is my son in every way that matters. I will love him, protect him, and raise him as my own. He will never know any father but me." Tessa's eyes filled with tears. "I never doubted that for a moment." Garrett took her hand, his expression solemn. "When I saw you in that church in Lone Pine, something told me you were meant to be in my life. I didn't understand it then, but I do now." He leaned down and kissed her softly. "I love you, Tessa Young. You and Thomas are my family, my heart, my home." "And you are ours," Tessa replied, her heart overflowing with love for this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. As the first light of dawn filtered through the window, illuminating the small family in its gentle glow, Tessa reflected on the strange and beautiful journey that had brought her here. From the humiliation and heartbreak of being left at the altar to the joy and peace of this moment, it was a path she could never have imagined, but one she now wouldn't change for anything in the world. William Henderson had indeed been a fool, just as Garrett had observed that fateful day. But his foolishness had led her to a love deeper and truer than she had ever known was possible. As she drifted off to sleep, secure in her husband's embrace with their newborn son sleeping nearby, Tessa knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys to the Young family. Their horse breeding business flourished, gaining a reputation throughout Northern California for quality stock. The small cabin expanded as their family grew. Thomas was joined by a sister, Elizabeth, 2 years later, and then by another brother, James, 2 years after that. Garrett proved to be an exceptional father, patient and loving with all 3 children, never once showing any difference in his affection for Thomas compared to the 2 who shared his blood. To everyone in Willow Creek, and most importantly to Thomas himself, Garrett Young was his father in every sense of the word. Tessa blossomed as well, developing a skill for breeding and training horses that matched Garrett's own. They worked as true partners, each contributing equally to their growing ranch. Their love deepened with each passing year, strengthened by the challenges they overcame together and the family they built. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their now substantial farmhouse watching their children play in the yard, Garrett took Tessa's hand in his. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Marrying a stranger that day in Lone Pine?" Tessa turned to look at him, at the face that had become as familiar and essential to her as her own reflection. The years had added a few lines around his eyes and threads of silver at his temples, but he was still the most handsome man she had ever known. "Not for a single moment," she answered truthfully. "You saved me, Garrett." He shook his head. "We saved each other." As the sun set over their land, their home, Garrett pulled Tessa close and kissed her, a decade of love and partnership expressed in that one tender gesture. Sometimes, Tessa reflected, the greatest blessings come disguised as heartbreak. Being left at the altar had seemed like the end of her world, but it had actually been the beginning of a far better one than she could have imagined. And somewhere out there, William Henderson, that foolish, faithless man, had no idea what a precious gift he had thrown away, or what an incredible life had been built from the ashes of his betrayal.